So I'm going to use the schmincke palette, and there's some water here. Now the brushes that I'm going to use are, let's check, where are my brushes? A rosemary R13 travel brush. I've had this for a long time. So just to inform you, you are looking from up here. My eyes are looking from here, so you'll have slightly different point of view. Do I use a pencil first? I could, but let's not. What color should I use? Well, we have an orange, which is basically red and yellow. So we have a red and yellow situation. And then there's also this sort of kind of like, what color is this yolk? Not yolk, sorry, the egg whites that are flattened like this. There is a lot of, you might say black, but there isn't. It's more of a brown, right? So we're looking at maybe a light brown, like this color maybe, right? And then there is also a bright red, and then there's also a sort of what I call Indian yellow, which is quite an orangey deep yellow. So if you mix these two together, you get roughly this. And there's also a lot of reflection, a lot of white spaces in between. So what I'm going to do is use the lightest color here, which would be the yellow, and this is going to be what I'm going to use. Okay, so we're going to just figure out where the yolk's going to be, about there. And then, because it's sort of the same color, I'm going to try and figure out where all the crispy edges are, which is slightly brownish and slightly yellowish. Going out this way, there's a hole kind of here. So I want to remind you that when we're doing shapes that are sort of abstract, which is just what this is, it is a waste of time to try to get it correct, isn't it? Just like when we're doing tree trunks and things like this. So it's kind of a waste of time to try to get it correct, but we're trying to get it as close as possible, right, in our minds. So I'm not doing a very straight continuous line. I'm actually doing dotted lines to try and get. So I'm going to ignore the plate. I'm trying to get to the general shape that's going on right now, which is actually very abstract here. So that's basically the color. So quite a lot of times when I see a lot of wet, this is quite a lot of paint. What I want to do is try to bring it into the painting as to remove more paint from the edges by bringing it in. But you see how there's a lot of things going on in here. So what I'm going to do is use the side of my brush. It's quite wet, it's quite clean, just water. And I'm just trying to bring some of these in by inviting it, by creating channels in the yolk, in the egg white area, without going, we're not going to do that. We're going to just invite some of the paint that is on the edge of this to come in. You see, if I just touch the tip of this, I'll bring it in. And now once I do that, it starts to come in. And of course, it's a bunch of abstract shapes. There's bubbles, there's creases. So we're not going to try and get those correct either. We're just going to get an impression of it by moving my brush kind of on the side like this. So the minute you're trying to create exactness, you're gonna get a very stiff looking egg. Don't do that. So once I run out of water, I go back into the water to dip my brush and try to bring it back into some more damp situation. Dampness is the quality we want here. So do you see that I'm beginning to get a semblance of puckering and things? So now that I have a lot of space here to cover, but I don't have enough paint from the outside, I'm going to dip into my yellow. I'm going to put it on my palette a little bit here just to water it down a little bit, and I'm going to just keep going into the edges again and trying to create a few more damp area around the edge, because right now the edge that I created over here has dried. So I'm now trying to recreate it again, and then I'll clean my brush and start again. So this is pretty wet. I use the side of it, and I'm going to bring the color in by adding these little channels of water. So I use the side and I move my brush like this. So I still want to leave some of those edges alone, but I also want to bring them in, soften it up. Sometimes I will try to create a bit of texture with the brush strokes by just dabbing it. It's getting drier and drier, and it's because it's getting drier and drier, we're gonna get this drying versions. So that's kind of a good start. The next thing I want to do is try to go into the yolk. Now, what color should I use? I will be very bold and go with the red. Oh, what? Really? Yep, I'm gonna go in with the red because, trust me, this is what you want to do. So there's a couple of white areas in the middle of the yolk that you kind of want to leave white because it is watercolor after all. And the rest of it, you see how I'm not actually using that thick of a paint. This is pretty light, right? And we're just trying to create the bubbly effect. It's pretty similar to what I'm doing on the outside just now. Bringing it in, I'm creating channels again. No, now, while this is still wet, it is possibly the best time to get back into with the yellow. You see how now I get an orange, and it's adding the yellow into the red gets you an orange, but also it gets you a very soft orange because they mix on the paper themselves. You see that? So right now, because of the bubbling of the paper, some of the water is bubbling and kind of collecting on this corner. So this is beautiful looking. This is what we want in the end. What I'm gonna do is just clean up the edge a little bit here, because the edge of a yolk tends to be the perfect edge. Now what I want to do is add a little bit more shadow that is going on inside the egg area here. So I'm going to use this light sort of burned umber brown by adding that into the mix of yellow that I already have. So we want this to be very, very, very light. So now we're going to start again from the outside in by adding the other extra tone, the extra color. Now this is your chance to channel your inner abstract artist. Now the key with abstract art and the key to nature in general is to create shapes that are not the same. So the skill that you need to have here is abstract texturing skills. And the best way I can describe this skill is to know how to... The language of texture means you have to learn that every single line that you create is different from the one before. And the way I do that is to make sure that I have a variety of movements. I go in and out, left and right. I go down and up, pushing left and right. I am kind of doing performance art, tracing things. And then I sometimes look here and see, okay, that's a lot of little dotted texture. So I'm dotting it over here, but then it becomes kind of a little bit thinner here. And then it becomes a little bit high and low here. So a lot of this requires you to have some vocabulary in your head to help you do the work. So some of this vocabulary comes from your left brain. Your left brain kind of needed to instruct a little bit, because otherwise what happens is your school training is going to kick in and you're going to be doing line, and you're going to try and make everything kind of the same. And that will kill your egg. Truly, truly it will. So I'm going to move a little faster now. And sometimes speed can be really, really good and can be very beneficial for creating shapes. So some of this, I'm going to also channel a little bit of water through some of this to soften some of those edges, because not every edge is the same. So besides creating different shapes and different texture, you want to also create different values, different thick and thin, and different variety of those values. So around the edge of here, this is already a little bit dry around the edge of my yolk. So I'm gonna try and add in the shadows in here without dampening it. So this is a lot of a pool of color here. The way I can clean this is to just take all the water out of my brush. So my brush is now ready to suck a lot of this out. So in order to do this, you just touch it with the tip of your brush and take it out. There you go. So what happens is also when you do this, your yolk becomes kind of light. It doesn't have that darkness anymore, but that's okay. We can add in all that later. So now I'm back to creating more texture. Out here, there's a lot of light here, a lot of dark here, and then there's this little extra here. And so now here, what I'm doing is I'm gonna intensify the brown a little bit, and I'm gonna try and get a little bit of shadows, which is going on underneath here. So when it comes to shadow, they are one continuous line. They're one continuous shape rather. So you don't want that broken, because shadows only broke when it's reflecting breakage, right? So this is like a continuous curly edges on your eggs. So what you want to do is to have a continuous curly shadow, including here, which is the shadow of the little tip of the egg white that's sticking out over here. So that we can deepen later we can totally 100 deepen it later. Because of my light, there's also some shadows on this side here. So my light source, I mean, so you can do that. Create a slightly deeper one in here. So I'm just looking at my egg and try to create that. So that's the shadow coming from the light that comes from the window. And now I'm going to introduce more red into here. Just because I feel like, you might agree, you might not, a yolk needs to have depth, because effectively this yolk is kind of like a curves like this. So around the edges of this so-called dome, it should be slightly darker. And yeah, I've done so many fried eggs Friday by now that I can sort of say I can do a variety of eggs. Now, if you think this is a little bit too red, oh, yolks is this red, Susan? That's okay. Add a bit more yellow back. So I do realize my yellow is actually more orange and more brown, and I'm okay with that. So I'm gonna just add that into here. And you see all this white stuff that I left in on purpose? I'm not gonna suggest that. I pull it out, I pull some of the yellow into there, so then you can see it more. Now I'm just gonna have to leave this alone for now. It's very, very interesting. The drama is in here. The drama is absolutely in here. So what I'm gonna do now is add a little bit of blue into my brown. And what I get is this kind of dark, 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 dark shadow. And I'm going to now recommit to my shadows here. And give you a nice clean shadow on the edge of this paper. And try not to talk while I do that. Clean curly, clean curly edge, so that it brings the egg up into a three-dimensional surface. Okay, so I'm going to also add another dark area here with the same brown to kind of add a little bit of dome situation into here. So I do realize that what you're looking and what I'm looking at is slightly different. So bear in mind of the different angles that I have. And then there's an angle in here in this hole. So I want to add that in as well. And I think I'm gonna stop there. Enjoy making your fried eggs Friday. I will see you in the next one. Bye.